GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley called out the Biden administration for making the United States more dependent on China. She said so during the second primary debate Wednesday. Watch this.
You have a company, U.S. Antibiotics, that produces amoxicillin, the #1 antibiotic that we need. And right now there is a company in Bristol, Tennessee that produces that, yet our federal government only gets it from China. We need to be focusing on companies that produce in America and supporting those companies that produce in America, not companies that are helping China.
So the U.S. importing nearly $7 billion worth of drugs from China in 2022. That number is up from $820 million just a year earlier in 2021. The surge reportedly being driven by chemotherapy drugs and cardiovascular drugs, as well as the infection drugs that Haley mentioned. Todd, remember during COVID, when we saw the Chinese media, state media, come out with a tweet saying, well, the United States needs the active ingredients from China, and maybe we just won't send them to America anymore. And there's also a comment that Xi Jinping made in a speech that he made during the 100-year celebration of the Communist Party, saying, we have to make sure the world is dependent on the Chinese supply chain so that we can turn it off when we deem necessary. Unbelievable.
Because then that otherwise gives them the leverage to control the world, which we can't have. But with regard to the drugs in particular, you raise such a great point. This is biological/chemical warfare, if you actually think about it, because if they can turn off the spigot, people could potentially die. And I actually think Nikki Haley should have gone a step further because, you know, I deal with amoxicillin right now. We're trying to give our little one amoxicillin. She is not going to die if she doesn't get amoxicillin. But you mentioned chemotherapy and cardiovascular drugs. If they turn off the spigot on those, people could actually die. And it's not just those three that we mentioned, Maria. There's a lot more in the pipeline that we are dependent on China for. And you worry that if they really wanted to play hardball, and I do not believe that they have come close to playing as hard as they potentially could, China could put us in a real bind. It makes no sense. We are America. We invented manufacturing. We should be able to bring manufacturing of drugs stateside.
You're right, Cheryl, it's unbelievable. Right now, not only are we dependent on China for these active ingredients in the drugs that we need, but what the Biden administration is doing is jamming through this climate change agenda, making us dependent on China for the electric vehicles they want us to buy. The batteries are made in China. So we're doing it all over again. Even as they talk about lessening the supply chains, they're not.
And this is another mistake by the Biden administration. I'm glad, Maria, that you brought up with Todd the issue of the pandemic, because that's when we really learned and Americans became most aware that their drugs for not just the serious drugs like for chemotherapy, but also blood pressure medication, statins, those things were coming from China and also from India. Did the Biden administration do anything to change any of those supply chains or to encourage domestic manufacturing? No. To your point, Maria, they're trying to slam EVs down our throats. You know, who can afford a $60,000 Tesla? Most Americans can't. They can barely afford food right now. That's the inflation story. But I think the other thing that's really disheartening about all of this is that Todd makes that great point that this makes us still, to this day, dependent on the Chinese. And maybe that's why we've seen official after official go to Beijing, some of them eating mushrooms, you know, pun intended here, to no avail. And why? I still want to know why, Maria.
Well, we're begging them for a partnership, John, and in the meantime, they should be coming to us. Instead, Joe Biden is begging for communication. I don't know what's going on, but they certainly are not showing the United States with any respect. Yeah, yes, Janet Yellen, they fed psychedelic mushrooms, and she ate them.
Yeah, and that's why she went ahead and said perhaps the dollar need not be the world's strongest currency, which is absolutely suicide for the U.S. economy and our AAA credit rating. I mean, you know, the reality is that we do need a diversity of sources as far as production of critical materials, drugs, and whatnot are concerned. But to get to this diversity of production, it's going to be costly. The reason why we import these drugs so gladly, let's say, from China is because it is cheaper. but cheaper isn't good enough. You have to take into consideration national security matters, and that's being ignored by the Biden administration.
It's a great point. Was cheaper any better when they were talking about vaccines from China? I don't think so. By the way, Nikki Haley came out again so well in that debate. You have to wonder if anybody on that stage Donald Trump was looking at and saying, well, this could be a good partner. He killed that notion when he was with the United Auto Workers on Wednesday. Listen to what Trump said about the potential for choosing a vice president from someone on that debate stage. Watch this.
They're all job candidates. They want to be in the, they'll do anything. Secretary of something. They even say VP. I don't know. Does anybody see any VP in the group? I don't think so.
I don't think so. Wow. Your thoughts, Todd?
I think he could change his mind when it comes to Nikki Haley, but let's be realistic. He's not changing his mind when it comes to Mike Pence, and I don't think he's changing his mind when it comes to Ron DeSantis. I think there's too much bad blood there. I think Nikki Haley and Donald Trump have done a little bit of a dance over the course of the last couple months. They haven't completely attacked one another, so the door is still open for one Nikki Haley.
Well, they were dancing even during the Trump administration.
Yes.
She, I was told, wanted the role, but he didn't want to dump Pence at that time.